Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here and to see old friends and fellow travelers along the local history lines. I should really give credit to our speaker for this, but his comment as we were watching the highly disputed election that just took place of the officers for the Friends of the Library, somehow that seemed very appropriate for the talk you're about to hear because it was reminiscent of something else. Now, of course, as a 12 or 13-year member of the Corning administration, I have no idea what he's alluding to. And I assume that the book that we're going to discuss is one that has got to be tongue-in-cheek because we all know what a Swiss watch the city administration was, an absolute paragon of civil service reform and other fine things. Paul Grandal, who hails from Seattle and is a graduate of the University of Puget Sound, and one of our own in that he came here and became a graduate of the State University of New York at Albany, which has, as you know, our wonderful, wonderful Writers Institute that's headed and founded by Bill Kennedy. Paul has taken on a very difficult task, a task that I would never take on because I'm too close to it. And for all of the talk at the time of the passing of Erastus Corning, it was very difficult to see any final product that would come out that would even act as a base on the Corning years and on the personage of Erastus Corning. And one of the things that I have learned, having written on local history, is what I'm sure Paul is learning now, is you never write on local history because somebody will always come up and they'll say, you'll mention a book and they'll say, no good. Why? You know what he left out? And they will always concentrate on the story that they know or the person that they know or the opinion that they have. There are, however, hundreds of pages in here. And I know that Paul must feel, as we all do, that it's a work that's always in progress because the stories are always out there. But that monumental and difficult task of starting the first book on Erastus Corning, of getting the basic documentation down, that's something which for so many of our people who have had such a great effect on our lives and our communities, in fact, never gets done. And so we are a grateful community in that we know that this newer Albanian who chose us when he came here to go to the State University has made extraordinary efforts to give us something which to many of our younger people has already been lost. I went and gave a talk up at the College of St. Rose. It's got to be 4 years ago for Sister Agnes Rose Burton. And it was on Albany politics. And you forget that we age. And I always start with the modern era, somewhere around 1961 with the Cure campaign and the Reverend Hudnut and so on. And it's a break, and it's the Rockefeller years. And I would go on this and Corning that, and of course Corning the other thing and so on. And I thought I was being absolutely brilliant. This was a graduate class. And a young man raised his hand and said, who's Corning? And, you know, it was very difficult. It was very shocking to me to think that this Albany icon would not be known by everybody. And this is somebody who lived in this area for a while. But time passes. We all know Paul Grandal. We know his works from the Times-Union. If you read Sunday before last, I don't know how many people have mentioned the very poignant story of the young couple where she became crippled just before they were to be married, and for 10 years the two of them have supported one another, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tribute to the human spirit and just how great it can be. Paul is a sensitive writer. He's a person who cares about the people he writes about, and he has given to us a wonderful gift, in his opinion, of where the Corning years were and where they sit in our history. And so without further ado, I'm very pleased. I should say one other thing. I have to be over the governor's mansion in a little while. So at some point I'm going to get up and leave, and I don't want to say, and McEnany got so mad he left right in the middle of Grandal's talk. I'll be here for a little while, but if it goes too long, I've got to go over to the other place, and that's the reason why, and not what's said here. But it gives me a great deal of pleasure to present Paul Grandal.
Thanks a lot for that nice introduction, Jack. I'm honored to be here this evening and kind of humbled. Sitting here in the front row, Assemblyman Jack McEnany and Professor Ivan Steen from the University at Albany are real treasures of Albany history and political history, and I'm honored that they're both here, and I feel that I sort of follow on their footsteps. Like Jack said, I'm something of a newcomer to Albany, and a lot of people laid the foundation of research and knowledge that helped me write this book. It's good to be back here in the New York State Library, where I found several important sources for my biography of Mayor Erastus Corning II. But first, I'd just like to point out that I was prepared to return a rare photograph of the mayor in his christening outfit with his mother from 1909 that Norman Rice of the Friends of the State Library had loaned me and has been asking to get back. I had it with me, but Norman can't be here, and I regret that, but I wanted everyone to know that I was prepared to return it to Norman. And I also wanted to mention I don't have any overdue books at the State Library, so I can go on with a clear conscience. I do need to acknowledge a large debt of gratitude, however, to the State Library, where I was chosen for its residency research program while I was working on this biography. The program gave me special privileges such as free photocopying and intensive assistance from the staff here. I'd like to thank in particular Paul Mercer and Jim Corsero, who steered me to exceptionally valuable material, including an amateur film reel that showed Corning marching off to join the Army during World War II on April 13, 1944, and a top-secret scouting report prepared by a Washington insider on Corning and sent to President Truman regarding Corning's fitness for a federal appointment. Also, it was in the State Library, on a tip from Norman Rice, that I found the memoir of Rear Admiral Albert Smith Barker, second husband of the mayor's grandmother, a rare self-published volume that I couldn't locate anywhere else. I could go on and on like this. I've used the State Library on numerous occasions for my research on stories for the Times-Union, too. But rather than simply tell you about the importance of this collection in my work, I'll show you by reading a few sections from the book that grew directly out of research here at the State Library. I also promised Norman Rice that I'd speak on the topic Second Thoughts on Mayor Corning, which I will get to, and will be sure to leave some time for all your questions at the end. But to those of you who might be new to Albany or Mayor Corning, I'd like to start with just a brief sketch of the man to whom I devoted 4 years of my late nights in my attic writing space trying to know and to comprehend. Now, my book's title is Mayor Corning, Albany Icon, Albany Enigma, which suggests just how elusive the man ultimately turned out to be. I didn't try to reduce him to some simple formula of ambitious politician or a man obsessed with power or even of a simply altruistic public servant. Erastus Corning II was an exceptionally complex man who defied such pat classifications. He was born in 1909 into the wealth and privilege of one of Albany's most prominent families. His great-grandfather, the first Erastus Corning, was the founder of the New York Central Railroad, one of the wealthiest men in the state, a Western land speculator, and an early booster of the Erie Canal. He also was a powerful politico tied to the Albany Regency and President Martin Van Buren. Erastus Corning eventually was elected to Congress, where he used his vast network of political ties to enhance his own far-flung business ventures. His career was an early textbook case underscoring that political access is power. The mayor's father, Edwin Corning, president of Ludlam Steel, was the New York State Democratic chairman and served as lieutenant governor under Al Smith. The mayor's father and his uncle, Parker Corning, a congressman and president of Albany Felt, joined forces with Dan O'Connell and O'Connell's brothers to form a Democratic organization that seized City Hall from the Republicans in 1921 and has not yet relinquished it. That makes it the longest-running Democratic machine in the land, and in Erastus Corning II, the machine found its mayor for life. Corning was one of the best and brightest of his generation, tying for top honors in the class of 1928 at Groton with Joseph Alsop, the Washington columnist and author. He was Phi Beta Kappa in his junior year at Yale and won top academic honors there in a brilliant and accomplished class of 1932, which included Richard Bissell, who went on to become an intelligence official and the #2 man at the CIA. Erastus Corning II was just 27 years old when he was elected to the New York State Assembly, one of the youngest members in the history of the legislature, and he became a state senator before he reached his 30th birthday. He was touted as a future governor of New York. He was destined for greater things than even his illustrious college classmates. It was widely believed. Instead, he was sworn in as mayor of Albany on December 31st, 1941, and took up his post at what he liked to call the Old Stand, a pedestrian gray metal desk in room 102 in City Hall. Corning was elected to an unprecedented 11 terms, 42 years in all as mayor, making him the longest tenured mayor of any city in America. And in that long, long reign, Mayor Corning became as enduring as the snow piles on Albany's poorly plowed city streets. In a front-page article in the New York Times on political corruption in Albany, Sidney Schamberg wrote, "There's a popular saying here, God brought the snow, and God will take it away." Schamberg added dryly, sometime around March or April. Although it would have been a kind of sacrilege to 2 generations of loyal Albany Democrats who elevated Corning to a status approaching that of demigod to suggest he was mortal, a higher power did indeed call to take the mayor for life away, too. Like the piles of snow, he never could quite get properly plowed off Albany's streets. The end of the road came in springtime. Mayor Corning died in office on May 28, 1983 at Boston University Hospital, where he had spent many months in intensive care, breathing with the aid of a respirator before finally succumbing to emphysema and other complications. Now, I'd like to read you a section from the book that provides an overview of the mayor's political career and touches upon that nagging question of his apparent lack of political ambition. This portion came directly from a document in the collection that I located here at the State Library with the assistance of the staff. During the 4 decades of his mayoralty, Erastus Corning had opportunities for other political jobs dangled before him: congressman, state environmental commissioner, state Democratic Party chairman, governor. He turned his back on all of them. Perhaps Corning's most curious turndown was an offer from President Harry Truman for Corning to become a member of his cabinet. Truman offered Corning the job of Secretary of Commerce, but the mayor turned it down, said Mark Heller, a law partner of Howard Nolan. "I know that's true. My father, Julius Heller, a longtime newspaperman with the Knickerbocker News, was in his office at City Hall when Corning took the call." Heller said he had never made that story public before, but Heller's revelation helped explain a cryptic scouting report on Mayor Corning from an anonymous political consultant. The unsigned, typewritten memorandum was sent to President Truman on February 8, 1952, and is contained in the collection of Francis Perkins of Washington, D.C., housed in the New York State Library. The unknown author critiqued Robert Wagner, Jr., quote, "appears to be almost illiterate, although he is a graduate of Yale College and Yale Law School." And also Franklin D. Roosevelt, Jr., quote, "young and a very poor record of attendance in Congress," end quote, and others in addition to Corning. The report on Corning is informative for its political astuteness and unvarnished view of the mayor. And this is it. With regard to Erastus Corning, mayor of Albany, I personally have been much impressed with him on the few occasions when I have seen him, but I learned from those who have had an intimate opportunity to observe him as mayor that he has been completely under the thumb of the O'Connells, and that Dan O'Connell ran the city of Albany from the federal penitentiary where he once resided. The O'Connells have, as you know, always been regarded as the less desirable type of Democratic bosses. Al Smith definitely broke with them, but that was a good many years ago. There is also a wide difference of opinion as to whether Erastus Corning's father, Edwin, who was lieutenant governor under Smith, was a desirable character. I was reliably informed that Governor Smith told me he would never permit him to be governor because Corning would turn the state of New York over to be looted. This statement was said to be a direct quotation. And I do now recall that Smith felt very doubtful and suspicious of Edwin Corning. An uncle was also not much, I am told, and was given to helping himself. Two Erastus Cornings have been physicians and have had an admirable background. Elting Corning, who is an uncle of the present young Erastus, is a very fine young man. It appears that Elting and Dr. Erastus recommended that young Erastus be trained for a profession like medicine or law or even the church and not be allowed to go into politics. Young Erastus is very bright, had excellent academic marks at the academy and at college, and some of the older friends of Dr. Erastus regretted the fact that he ever went into politics, thinking it would ruin what might otherwise be a good person. I am sorry to report this, for I have been very well impressed with him, and his popularity among veterans is astonishingly good. That intriguing synopsis touched upon the essential enigma of Erastus Corning. So much promise, so little progress. It is no small feat to get elected 11 times to any position, be it dog catcher or mayor. But in the symphony of Albany politics, Corning played second fiddle to Dan O'Connell for 36 of his 42 years in City Hall. The job remained interesting for Corning because of his close interaction with a wide range of people and the way he controlled the destiny of so many in his hands. But what did Corning do with all his local power and extraordinary access to state and national political arenas? Sooner or later, whether political allies, friends from his social class, or blue-collar city employees, everyone voiced the essential Corning conundrum. Why did he stay mayor of Albany for so long? With all his intellect and ability, why did he not reach for higher office? Where was his political ambition? There were as many interpretations as people who knew Corning. The mayor himself used a simple analogy. I like to be a big fish in a little pond. Many friends believe that went a long way toward answering the question, but other motivations were ascribed to what some view as Corning's record as an underachiever. Thomas Brown, the state assemblyman, remembered Corning's reply to his question about the mayor's apparent lack of political ambition. "Well, Tommy," the mayor began, "to ascend to something you assume is high but which has no real power is one thing. But to be in the center of a whirlwind every day and to be able to control the storm is another." As mayor of Albany, Corning could be king, but as congressman or state senator or even governor, his powers were more princely in their scope. By moving up, he would inherit layers of superiors to whom he would have been beholden in higher office, be it statewide or national. In Albany, he answered only to Dan O'Connell. And when Dan died, he called all the shots himself. The power at City Hall was pure and undiluted, a potent drug. Close associates, such as Judge Francis Bergen, offered a more pragmatic reading of the flat line of Corning's political career. First of all, the power in the mayor's office was more centralized and intense than perhaps any other elected position. Secondly, the lucrative insurance business that flowed to Corning's Albany associates would dry up if he left City Hall. And that conduit of cash was Corning's primary means of support. Thirdly, the Pauli Noonan factor was an Achilles heel political opponents would exploit if Corning tried to move up to statewide or national office. Finally, Corning really did enjoy direct contact with the gamut of people he saw and helped as mayor, and his mastery of the job left time for pursuing his myriad intellectual and outdoor sporting interests. That's the way Bergen saw it, and many Corning associates agreed with the sage judge's summation. I'd like to follow up that section by reading one more from the book that benefited greatly from my research here at the State Library. In particular, Jim Cursero of the library staff called me to say he had found a 30-minute documentary film called Wartime Albany that showed Mayor Corning and his fellow inductees marching off to fight the Germans on April 13, 1944. I never would have known about this film if it hadn't been for Jim Corsero and if the State Library hadn't preserved what is likely the only copy. What watching that film did was provide me with a visual element that brought the scene alive when I pieced it together with my interviews of the surviving members of the mayor's April 13th draftees group, researched the mayor's papers, and reviewed newspaper accounts. Here's that opening to chapter 6. April 13th, 1944. The day to go off to war had arrived for the mayor. Just 10 days before, an induction order was delivered at City Hall for Erastus Corning. He doodled on the back of his order with a pencil, made some mathematical calculations regarding fuel oil, which was being rationed at that time. A few men tried to get out of the draft in Albany, but the vast majority, including Corning, accepted their military service as required duty to their country. Not happily, perhaps, but resignedly. Corning kept busy in the nervous time leading up to the induction day. Besides running the city, preparing for his departure by getting his political house in order, and spending time with his family, the Cornings were selling off their livestock and hunkering down for the sacrifices of wartime. Hundreds of flyers were distributed for the Corning Farms dispersal sale of Holsteins on April 8, 1944, a large auction of cows to settle Parker's estate. The mayor's uncle had died 3 years earlier, and Erastus was helping to wrap up loose ends on the estate. In April of 1944, the mayor was 35 years old, with a wife and 2 children, a son, Erastus III, 11, and a daughter, Bettina, age 6, and a job running New York's capital city and a prosperous insurance company. Corning could have received a deferment, as other mayors and other elected officials did, but Erastus would have none of it. I'd never asked for a deferment for anyone in the city, so I would have looked like a damn fool if I had asked for one for myself, Corning told Judith Morrison Lipton in a 1974 interview for a local magazine called Insight. He said he declined an opportunity to enter officers' candidate school, too. I wasn't going to run away and take a commission, he said. Corning was notified by order number 2668 on April 3rd by the Albany County Draft Board number 342 of the U.S. Selective System, a draft board that he controlled as mayor. Corning was to report for induction at 8 o'clock on the morning of April 13th to room 1001 in the building at 75 State Street, a familiar address to the mayor since it was Democratic headquarters. Civilian life had come to an end for Corning, and the small print of the induction order was this: willful failure to report promptly to this local board at the hour and on the day named in this notice is a violation of the Selective Training and Service Act of 1940 as amended and subjects the violator to fine and imprisonment. At 75 State Street, the inductees posed for an amateur filmmaker, stripped to the waist and joking with each other as they were examined by doctors for blood pressure and eyesight. Corning and more than 60 other men from Albany reporting for induction into the Army. For the most part, these were men in their 30s with jobs, wives, and children, and they had no choice. One of them, 31-year-old Jake Carey, had to quit his job in the bakery at Freihofer's, and as he marched from the Washington Avenue Armory to Union Station on induction day, his wife, Alice, lay in Albany Medical Center Hospital nursing their 5-day-old son. We joked that they had finally reached the bottom of the barrel when they drafted us, and that's what we called ourselves, the bottom of the barrel, said Stanley Zimmer, who was inducted with Corning. The war was almost over by then. We were older guys with families, and we knew they must have been reaching pretty far down to get us. While Corning's patriotism ran high, as it always had, so too did his equally fervent desire to do the best thing politically. Corning was first sworn in as mayor 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, after winning an election by a landslide, 57,938 votes to Republican Benjamin Hoff's 11,172 votes. During the campaign and throughout 1942, his first year in office, Corning beat the drum for America's war effort and pledged to do all he could as mayor to support his nation's armed forces. Our country has been savagely and treacherously attacked by the ruthless tactics of Japan's allies, Corning told the Albany Chamber of Commerce in his first public address as mayor-elect. There is no question of the nation's unity and its determination to protect American interests and the principles of American government at no matter what cost. The job is for all of us as individuals and as Albanians, as well as Americans. The city must and will play its part to the utmost. Furthermore, political boss Dan O'Connell had counseled Corning to join the Army and not seek a deferment. The political dividends for a mayor who served his country would be astounding for many years to come. O'Connell knew this. He had used his own military service to utmost political advantage. In fact, O'Connell's return as a Navy war hero at the end of World War I gave a big boost to the O'Connell and Corning efforts to establish a democratic political organization that could finally defeat the dynasty of the Barnes Republican machine. O'Connell appeared in campaign banners in his Navy uniform in 1919, a tactic that proved hugely popular with Albany voters. O'Connell was elected city assessor, his first and only elected office, and the O'Connell-Corning machine had established a foothold. There was one other item of political expediency for Corning's Army induction. Governor Thomas E. Dewey, the Republican governor of New York State. Dewey was elected in 1942 by unseating Democratic incumbent Governor Charles Paletti, who completed the unexpired term of Governor Herbert Lehman after Lehman resigned to take a federal post. Paletti served just 28 days as governor, the shortest gubernatorial regime in state history, before Dewey won back the executive mansion for the Republicans and held it for 11 years, one of the longest terms. As a new Republican governor, Dewey immediately grew obsessed with toppling the O'Connell-Corning machine. He launched in 1943 the first investigation into political corruption in Albany, mostly unsuccessful, and a second probe in the spring of 1944 in a renewed drive to pin corruption charges that would stick to Albany's fabled democratic organization. Corning ripped into Dewey, comparing him to Hitler in a radio speech on April 3, 1944, allowing the mayor to leave Albany as a conquering hero, not a corrupt politician. In recent months, Albany has been turned into an occupied city by the governor of the state, a small man with a violent and burning desire to be the Republican candidate for presidency this fall. Terrorism, intimidation, smearing by innuendo, and cleverly designed half-truths, threats that almost border on blackmail, are the weapons used by this small-sized counterpart of the European dictator and his satellites and subservient underlings. I am sickened by this small man's disregard of human rights and human decencies. A brilliant strategy for Corning. Sucker punch Dewey and then exit, treading the moral high ground. How do you investigate an absent mayor, let alone a heroic army infantryman headed off to fight the Nazis? Another frustration, investigatus interruptus for Dewey. On the home front, Corning's wife Betty, who was not the least bit interested in politics and did not care how the mayor's induction solved the machine's political problems, was not eager to see her husband go off to war, but the mayor would not be swayed. The sense of duty to country and the potential political benefits outweighed the sense of danger and fear of what the mayor-elect in a speech at Christmas time in 1941 had called a war of frightful possibilities. It was sunny and brisk on April 13, 1944, the dreaded day of induction. I hated like hell to go in, James Tortorici said. Tortorici was 34 years old at the time, with a wife and a 2-year-old son. He owned an Albany barbershop and was inducted alongside Corning. I remember wishing I had a heart attack during the physical. None of us wanted to go in. I tried to get out of it, but there was no way out. Corning passed the mayoral torch to acting Mayor Frank S. Harris at a meeting of the Common Council on April 12th with this bit of legalese. Pursuant to the provisions of Section 105B of the New York State War Emergency Act, being Chapter 445 of the laws of 1942, as amended by Chapter 544, Erastus Corning II, Mayor of the City of Albany, New York, having entered upon military duty, do hereby appoint Frank S. Harris, temporary Mayor of the City of Albany, effective this date, for the unexpired term of my office as Mayor, or until I shall return if the date of my return be prior to the expiration of such a term. In conclusion, Corning offered these heartfelt remarks to the Common Council. My prayer now is that I may return soon to our fine old city of Albany. I will leave with my heart full of pride and love for it, a deep feeling that I will always have wherever I may be. Corning joined the other inductees the next morning as they reported to the Armory on the corner of Washington Avenue and Lark Street for their induction instructions. Tortorici was friendly with several of the other men since he cut their hair at his shop at 210 Central Avenue or knew them from around town. There was Otto Fossil, the insurance agent, Joe Barbagallo, who ran a dry cleaning business on Lark Street, Thomas Prine, who had a tavern, Prime's Grill, on Broadway in North Albany, and Stanley Zimmer, who also had a barber shop next to Prime's. Corning did not move in their circle, inhabiting his own orbit as mayor. Still, Corning effortlessly and immediately became one of the boys at the Armory. Arthur O'Keefe, an amateur filmmaker and member of the Albany Amateur Motion Picture Society, captured the induction of the April 13th group, as they called themselves. O'Keefe made a 30-minute silent black and white documentary called Wartime Albany with footage shot between 1941 and 1945. The film captured the combination of bravado and fear that gripped Corning and the other men on their induction day, a mix of emotions plainly visible on their faces. In one shot, O'Keefe zoomed in for a long, tight close-up of Corning smoking a cigarette, a brown manila envelope tucked under his left arm. The envelope contained the official papers of each man reporting for duty. The others had elected Corning keeper of the dossier, their leader. In the film, the mayor stood with a knot of men outside the Armory, smoking, shaking hands, smiling shyly for the camera. He was a head taller than the rest and looked heavy, almost paunchy, with a jowly looseness around his face. The GI mayor wore a tweed suit with vest, a pocket watch, a crisp white shirt and tie, a brown fedora and camel hair overcoat, its collar turned up against the chill. He was better dressed than the other men and tried to assume a nonchalant air, but his darting eyes belied an edginess. Corning led the pack of men as they walked down from the Armory, Washington Avenue, and toward Union Station, where they boarded a train for Fort Dixon, New Jersey. Corning was their chief, clearly in command, comfortable with being in charge. He smoked a cigarette and strode purposely and forcefully down the avenue, alone. Curiously, Corning was one of the few men among the inductees who was not accompanied by a wife or a girlfriend or a mother. The mayor walked on by himself, stoically, without benefit of a loved one to share his fears. The others followed him. Some days before, on April 4th, Corning's colleague from the legislature, Senator William Bewley, Democrat from Middleport and chairman of Tax and Finance, wrote to the mayor, "No telling what the future has in store for you, but I am sure you are the type who will face it with the spirit that America, your country, comes first." Bewley wrote, "I know that you have that in mind when you are leaving your family and all that you are leaving behind to take the steps that you are taking." Although none of several other letters similar in tone to Bewley's explicitly mentioned the danger of Corning becoming a casualty of war, the possibility that the mayor might never return was in the subtext. If he was afraid, Corning managed to mask his fear on camera. As he marched off to war, leader of the pack, Corning must have been mulling over the letters offering Godspeed from friends, such as the one from March 14, 1944, from a Yale classmate, A. Augustus Lowe of New York City. "We want to warn you not to get lost in no man's land and to come back safe and sound and successful." I can remember how scared I was, hugging my little boy. He was clinging to me and I was choked up, almost crying, Tortorici recalled. The other guys were all saying their goodbyes too, and there were a lot of hugs and kisses, and women were crying and waving as we walked down Washington Avenue. Zimmer remembered Bill Buck Connolly, being so afraid he was rooted to the sidewalk and couldn't move. He was a big, tough guy, a truck driver, but he was crying awfully bad, Zimmer said. It was a shame to see that, but there was nothing we could do. We all just kept walking. They traveled quite a distance that day from the draft board at 75 State Street up the hill to Washington Avenue Armory and back down Washington Avenue they walked. March would be too strong a term for this motley assemblage of men marching off to fight the Germans. The citizens of Albany stopped on the street, stood in front of their shops and watched from stoops, waving and cheering these soldiers to be. Anti-Nazi sentiment ran high. One of the film's strongest images was of a little girl with a button that depicted Hitler being hanged from a noose, with appropriately moving parts and the words, "Let's pull together." The destination for Corning and the 60-odd inductees was Union Station in the train to Fort Dix for orientation. In the film, Corning was once more the focal point, waiting at the train ticket counter, smoking and smiling for the camera below a sign for the USO Lounge hung from a balcony. The mayor held court for a cluster of Army soldiers in uniform, apparently returning for leave, after leave, and they basked in Corning's electric smile and the glow that seemed to emanate from him. The film cut to a scene boarding the train. Corning lighted another cigarette, nodded and exchanged a few words with the conductor, who gave the mayor a farewell wave. Corning moved aside to let a few more men board before him, and then he stepped aboard. Inside the train, the mayor was tall and gangly and had to squat and duck under the overhead racks before taking his seat. That was the final image of Corning. The filmmaker cut away to a shot of a homemade sign that read, "So long, Mayor. Take care of yourself." The scene ended with a long, lingering shot of the train, belching black smoke, chugging across the bridge over the Hudson River toward Rensselaer, the smoke hovering like a passing storm cloud over what is now the Corning Preserve, before disappearing from view. Thank you. So that was kind of my way of stalling here, and I have to concede it's not easy for a writer to stand up and second-guess himself. We usually leave that to our editors and copy editors. But Norman Rice has put me up to it, so I'll put aside my discomfort and give it a try. Maybe the best way to get at this notion of second thoughts on Erastus Corning, which Norman asked me to speak about, is to respond to some of the letters I received about my book. The first and by far most detailed letter I received came from the mayor's grandson, Robert Dudley, sent only a few days after my publisher, Ann Older, gave him an advance copy, and a complimentary copy, I might add, of my book. If you count the preface, introduction, chronology, photographs, the book totals 624 pages. Now, Robert Dudley is a professor in the Department of Zoology at the University of Austin at Texas. Texas at Austin has a full workload, and yet he dashed off 6 pages, double-sided, single-spaced, of typed notes and comments with page numbers cited and extended quotations. It was even cross-referenced. The only thing missing was the footnotes. Now, I can only guess that he read my book poised on one knee with his laptop computer balanced on the other. But I'll give you one example. He cited page 34 when I discussed that the original Erastus Corning and his wife Harriet raised and supported 4 nieces. Robert Dudley's reply: "Following arguments of evolutionary psychology, such economic largesse toward closely related kin enhances an individual's overall genetic fitness. Note the perceived debt toward his uncle, a genetic quid pro quo, as it were." Dudley included dozens of similarly intensive commentaries. I'd never encountered such a close reader. It was actually a bit overwhelming. I felt like I was back in my college geology class and I hadn't done my homework. But I was grateful to Dudley for pointing out a few typographical and factual errors that I've corrected for the second printing, which should be coming out soon. But the overall tone of Dudley's response suggests that he wanted me to write an academic biography that attempted to analyze Mayor Corning as if he were a biological specimen on the dissection table. Dudley is a brilliant scientist, and he made some valid points, but I'm not an academic. I'll leave that type of book to someone more qualified. I'm a journalist and a writer, and the biography I wrote reflects that background. I wasn't going to adopt some kind of phony scholarly tone, but I will leave Dudley's comments with this parting response to the last chapter in my book. He wrote, This entire chapter is simply magnificent writing. So thank you, Professor Dudley. But there is an interesting coda to Dudley's reaction to my final chapter from another member of the Corning family, Cynthia Corning Richardson. She's a cousin to the mayor, and her grandfather was Dr. Erastus Corning IV, a guiding force in the early development of Albany Medical Center. And her father was Erastus Corning V, a radio personality and investment banker. Richardson wrote, "Had I had the terrible misfortune to have been born a boy, I would now be Erastus Corning VI. She wrote to say she wanted to compliment me on my book, but she also had a bone to pick. Out of 624 pages, she focused on a quote from my interview with Robert Dudley on the last page of the book. Dudley was commenting on his uncle, the mayor's son, Erastus Corning III, and said, 'Instead, what I find strange is that he went so far away and kind of dithered away his inheritance. It's an odd end to the Corning lineage. That's nature. Even successful species are eventually transformed or become extinct.' Richardson wrote to me, 'I was dismayed that you ended your largely impressive book with that misinformed and dismissive quote by Robert Dudley.' Well, I used the quote because it supported my narrative and summarized the trajectory of my book, the rise and fall of a politically and economically prominent family, symbolized in the closing chapter's auction of the mayor's personal effects and a scattering of historical artifacts. But I did find it fascinating that two members of the same family could read the ending in such diametrically opposed ways. Now, among the many letters, calls, and conversations I've had with people who have read the book, the one facet about the mayor I covered that seemed to attract the most attention was his sexual history and the intimate details of his private life. Again, the responses ran the gamut from those who thought I went too far to those who thought I didn't go far enough. Some questioned why I discussed the brief yet intimate relationship Corning had with his drama teacher at Groton, with whom Corning also toured Europe alone in the summer of 1928 after graduation. I included the details of that relationship because it was an important part of Corning's Groton experience, and it answered, in my mind, some of the issues surrounding the theme of absentee father that I addressed in the biography. In all, I devoted 3 pages out of the 624-page book to their relationship in what I feel is fair, balanced, and straightforward reportage. I interviewed all the surviving members of Corning's class of 1928 at Groton, the drama teacher's widow, Groton faculty, and they said it appeared to be a homosexual relationship, but they could not confirm it was physically consummated. I wrote exactly that, and also that I found absolutely no evidence that Corning ever exhibited any homosexual tendencies before or after that adolescent experimentation at Groton. In a similar sense, I had to face the matter of Mayor Corning's long and intense relationship with his confidant, Polly Noonan, and the Noonan family. Some flat out advised me to stay away from this area at the outset of my research, including the mayor's son, Erastus III. My response to him and to the others was that to meet it head on from the beginning. I told Erastus III and others that for me to ignore one of Mayor Corning's deepest and most lasting relationships would make me look naive or lazy or both as a biographer. So I approached the Corning-Noonan relationship in the same way as the Groton drama coach, through interviews and research and journalistic methods. In both cases, I put down the facts as I could discern them as a series of dots, but I never connected the dots in my narrative. I only wrote what was on the record and confirmed, and did not include the many other speculations, stories, innuendo, inconfirmed anecdotes, and gossip that many sources gave to me. Some who have finished the book said I played it too safe in this section, that I should have written what everyone already supposedly knew about the relationship between the mayor and Polly Noonan. In the end, I briefly summarized the long-held Albany mythology and surmise surrounding the relationship, but wrote that I found no documented evidence of what the public widely holds to be the real story. The surviving principals in the matter denied those allegations. Since I did not have letters, photographs, videotapes, blood tests, or even any first-hand eyewitness accounts that could be corroborated, I ended up again with a series of dots that revealed an incongruous and intriguing duality in Mayor Corning when it came to his biological and surrogate families. But I did not make the leap to connect those dots across a span of suppositions that I could not support, however juicy and tantalizing. I guess I did play it safe rather than resort to sensationalism. But Mayor Corning had enough juice in his life without me squeezing something out of it that wasn't there. That's a decision I won't second guess. Of course, there were matters that continue to nag me, underscored in the letters I've received. I'll mention only a few. Most of it centers on stories I wasn't able to get into the book. People will come up to me now, including some of the sources I interviewed at length during my research, and speak even more freely now that they know the book has been published. A congratulatory note from Judge Stephen Herrick was typical. The book is a wonder. I do, however, have a few stories you missed. Everyone who has lived in Albany for any time has a Corning story to tell, and I thought I'd heard them all. But obviously I did not, I could not. A letter from longtime State Public Information Officer Carl Felsen will suggest what's still out there to be known about Mayor Corning as yet untold. Felsen wrote to me about his going to work for Assembly Speaker Stanley Steingut in his correspondence office when a letter from Mayor Corning arrived. It was 1977, just after Dan O'Connell's death. Quote from Felsen, "The topic was local property assessment, and Mayor Corning was making a strong and non-public argument for the Speaker to introduce and push legislation to make assessors state employees," Felsen wrote. "Not only that, but each locality's assessing should be done by state employees not from the local area. The mayor said this was the only way to ensure fair, impartial assessment." Felsen went on to write in his letter, "Having heard the tales of how the machine used property assessments as a disciplinary tool, I could hardly believe what I was reading. Here was the public head of the machine privately telling Steingut to take away his tool or weapon from him." Felsen said his views of Mayor Corning began to change after that letter. Such an incongruous, behind-the-scenes move by Mayor Corning was oddly common, the enigma personified. I only wish Felsen had given me that anecdote before. But it's been said you never really do finish a biography, you just abandoned it. I remember having the same conversation with David McCullough and Doris Kearns Goodwin, two of our finest biographers and both Pulitzer Prize winners, when they visited Albany for the New York State Writers Institute. McCullough worked full-time for 14 years on Truman, and he said he could have gone on even longer, digging out more new information. Goodwin was talking about FDR and Eleanor, her FDR and Eleanor biography, No Ordinary Time, over drinks with Bill Kennedy and Jack McEnany. McEnany told an FDR anecdote that Goodwin hadn't heard before. She slapped the table, nearly upending her cocktail, and feigned to plug her ears because it was too late to get the story into the book. Then she laughed. She admitted that hearing a news story she has missed happened with some frequency. She said fixating on what you didn't get into the biography would keep you up at night and paralyze your progress if you let it. She told me the art of political biography rests in knowing when to let go. I gave Erastus Corning II a longer and more sustained effort than I gave either of my college degrees. I gave him a piece of my heart, I think. I know I didn't get every single anecdote into the book, but I'm happy to say I sleep well at night, I'm not in any way paralyzed, and I know I learned a lot in this writing project. And I know that I grew as a young writer by undertaking it. That's all you can hope for, and that there'll be another chance to do it better next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and enlightening presentation, and we look certainly forward to the question and answer portion. I should have noted earlier the session, it's obvious, is being videotaped by facilities from inside Albany for C-SPAN. And if we're fortunate, this will be on the C-SPAN program about books. Some of you may be familiar with it. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Janet Welsh, who is our State Librarian and Assistant Commissioner for Libraries. Janet.
Thank you. Would like to speak with you for just a moment and then turn this back over to Zeb for the part that will be most interesting, I think, and that's the questions and answers on the book that we've just heard about. But I couldn't resist as I was sitting here thinking that as a newcomer to Albany, I've lived here since July, that I probably could not share with you the wonderful and maybe not so wonderful memories you all have of life in Albany with under Erastus Corning. But actually, I do share a memory, which I was recalling as I was listening to the presentation, and that is almost 30 years ago now. I did live in Albany briefly, and when I worked as a librarian at the State University of Albany, I moved into, or attempted to move into, an apartment which you can actually see from this window right here on the streets of downtown Albany. And at that time, as I moved to Albany, I came in with a small amount of furniture in a vehicle, moved here in the winter from a much warmer climate, attempted to drive up to the apartment to be able to unload my what were at that time quite meager belongings, but could not get anywhere near the apartment because, as you will not be surprised, this was January, the streets had not been plowed. I went into the building and asked my to-be neighbors to help me get over to get the vehicle, shovel the snow, and get the vehicle over to the apartment so I could unload it. I had never at that time heard the name Erastus Corning. I was not familiar with it at all, but I did. As they would shovel the snow, I kept hearing the words, which I didn't quite understand at the time, that blankety blank Corning. And that was my first introduction to the name. Anyway, I have learned a whole lot about Albany and about Mayor Corning since then, and I very much appreciate hearing more about it from Paul. Would also like to let Paul know and the rest of you know that we are watching on what's called OCLC, the nationwide database of the holdings of almost all the libraries in the country, to make sure that all of the librarians all across the country have read the wonderful review of the book in the New York Times and are purchasing it for their libraries to make sure that it is available to library users all over the country. And we can see on the database what libraries actually hold the book, and we'll get after those that aren't purchasing it as rapidly as they should. I'd also like to thank Norman Rice and the Friends at the Library, particularly Norm, who could not be here tonight, but his energy and enthusiasm has helped to create the wonderful program we have going on now. The work of the Friends and the activities that they're doing, not only is Norman an energetic and enthusiastic leader of the Friends, but he is a tremendous library user. He is here almost every day. He learns more about the library. He's particularly interested in the technology in the library, and we very much appreciate both his support and having the opportunity to work with him on almost a daily basis. Also, I'd like to mention on behalf of the Friends that they do have another program coming up very soon. That's the Great New York Read Aloud, which will be held here on April 22nd, and that will be celebrating 180 years of Albany and of the New York State Library. And for those of you who haven't participated in the Read Aloud in the past, we encourage you to come, and if you would like to read as part of this program, let us know. And one other thing that I'd like to mention that's coming up at the library, which gives an example of the unique nature of this library and of the terrific support that we have here at the Friends of the Library. As part of my work as state librarian, I meet with other state librarians across the country, and we talk about their state libraries and what's going on there. None of them have the history, the extent of the collection that we have here, nor a Friends group, which is now 220 members strong, that's supporting their state library. I also have to mention that one of the other things I've learned in talking with state librarians across the country is that most state librarians are appointed not as in New York State, by the Board of Regents, but by the governor of the state, which means most state librarians serve very short tenures. And to kind of look at me as, gee, you might actually be around for more than a year or two, because they, in many cases, will not be. So that's another aspect of the state library that I do appreciate in New York. With a changeover in the governor, there will perhaps not be a changeover in the directorship of the state library. Would also like to thank the Friends in particular for their advocacy for the New York State Library, and this material is available in the back when you stay. We hope for the reception later you'll be able to pick this up. This is a summary of the current legislative interests of the New York State Library, and we very much appreciate the work that the Friends do to advocate for this. Also, as I was mentioning a moment ago, in terms of the tremendous resources of this library, also wanted you to be aware that Liz Lane, the relatively new director of the Research Library, has been able to arrange on May 14th and 15th that we will be displaying here the Emancipation Proclamation, which is part of one of the unique, but many unique items held in this library. It represents the richness of the history of this library and the materials that are held here. The Emancipation Proclamation is rarely displayed because it requires both environmental controls and security to display a document of that type. It will be on display in the library in May, and we hope you will come and see it. Finally, would like to thank all of you who are friends of the library, and to make sure, if there are any of you who aren't yet wearing your stickers, that we don't let you leave the meeting this evening or the reception without making sure that you join the Friends of the Library and get your sticker with the yes on it. And with that, I'd like to thank again the Friends for having this program, and Paul for being here, and turn it back over to Zeb for the questions of our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Paul, you want to come up here again, please? I'm supposed to moderate this, but I'll do what I can, okay?
They get a little unruly. I think you can
right,
handle them.
right,
Zeb.
right. I've got a guy back there to help me, too.
Yeah.
Do
So
we have any questions for Paul? Oh, I can't believe it.
I'll just get it started.
Yeah, sure.
It seems that the stigma of having a political machine behind you does not seem to be unique at that period. You've got the Tammany Hall machine in New York City, same thing in Boston.
Right.
And ironically, in being sought for that Department of Commerce position under Truman, Truman was under the stigma of the printer gas machine himself.
I do address some of that in the book. I put it in somewhat political, historical context, that this wasn't unique, but it was in the sense of how tightly it was controlled, how long it's been run. I mean, political scientists study Albany just for that. It was not, an aberration in the country at that time, but it continued longer than others and spanned longer, and certainly was as tightly or more tightly controlled than any of them at the time.
We have another question. Back here. Why don't I do a Phil Donahue, excuse me, Phil Donahue right here, or Oprah, or whatever.
My name is Mike Sugarman. I was briefly in 1967 and 1968 the director of ACOR, the County Anti-Poverty Program. I'm not mentioned in your book, much to my relief. More to my relief than to my chagrin. And I'm, unlike Ken Starr, not in the case of Monica Lewinsky, not particularly interested in other people's sex lives, as long as they're consensual, as long as they don't affect me. But I was interested in your discussion of the possibility of a homosexual relationship with the drama teacher at Groton. And I know you said there was no evidence of a subsequent one. And this is just a question, a supposition. I wonder if there might have been one, and whether it might have had something to do with his attachment to the Polly Noonan family and his alienation from his own family. And if O'Connell was aware of it, whether that would have something to do with his subservience to O'Connell and his apparent lack of ambition in such a brilliant man.
That sort of gets filed under all those innuendos and gossip that I heard that I didn't use. I've heard everything across the board about people trying to explain the strange triangle between Corning, the Noonan family, and his own family. And all I could use was what I could find and support factually and feel confident about. I didn't set out trying to savage the mayor. If I did, I would have taken every story I heard and run with it. I heard a lot of stories. I heard just such a story that maybe that wasn't the only instance of that kind of relationship. What interested me about it and why I used it at Groton was everything I read about his time at Groton, the people I talked to. He was a shy, sickly, afraid child there, very unhappy that he had been pulled by his father out of Albany Academy. It was a place where Joseph Alsop was so mercilessly rioted that he tried to commit suicide. He writes about in his memoirs a very grim, bleak place where they cut, it was like a wild pack of wolves where they cut the weaker one out and just rode that person, and he felt that. His father never once came to visit him at Groton. That came out. And his father was not there for him. Here was the drama teacher that took an interest in him. However way you want to describe that interest, it fit into what I was looking to talk about, this pattern of his own father not there, the mayor not there for his own son, up and down the line. So that's why I used it. All the other speculation I didn't get into, but I heard a lot about it. And I talked to Polly Noonan about the Groton experience and heard some fairly choice words from her, where she, would not refuse to believe any of that was ever true. So again, I could only use what I heard, but I heard a lot of pretty wild stories. Yeah.
Anyone else? Behind you? Oh, I'm sorry.
Paul, do you think that Mayor Corning had a sense of humor?
Yeah, he had a great sense of humor. One of my favorite things, people kind of focus on the negative, and sometimes they do in the book, but there's a lot of funny, humorous, positive aspects about the mayor that I think I developed in the book. One of my favorites was his little collection of what he called his pecker bones. These were penis bones of animals, skunks, muskrats, opossums. He kept them in his desk at City Hall. He had one in his wallet that he brought up to the Fort Orange Club. He was a guy who loved his drink. He would go out hunting with backwoods Maine people. He did crazy things in college. He was probably majored in bathtub gin at Yale during Prohibition. I mean, he was not a dour, plastic politician. He had a very rich private life in any number of ways. And what really interested me was this kind of earthy, raunchy side, and yet he could put on the gray flannel suit and be in that role too. He could do every role across every social class and connected with people. You can go around Albany now, and anyone who was here during Corning time will tell you that story the first time they went into the office, or they met him, or he did something special for them. I mean, 50 years from now, how many politicians will we be able to say that about? He had a deep connection with people that people never forgot, so that says something about his character, I think.
When I was first in Albany and didn't know too much, I was a political analyst. I was at a hotel for a conference, waiting to hang my coat up. He was behind me. And as we struggled with hangers, I handed him one, and he gave me $2. Excuse me, I'm a political analyst. I knew that was something. He said, "You'll do much better hanging up coats."
It's a great story. Another story I missed, see? Good. It's too late even for the second printing, I guess, so...
Anyone else? Yes, you have to speak right into that, please. Yeah.
Paul, this is another story, not a question, but you might want to comment. It's when I was a senior in high school, and during the reign, if you want, of Mayor Corning, and when the Hudson River was a creek, I was selected to be mayor of a day for Albany. And probably because of that, my parents decided to invite the mayor to my graduation party, and he did indeed show up. And he imbibed, He had a little bit to eat. He mingled with the people. But my point is that he was accessible.
Right.
And you probably heard from other people that you could go into his office and talk to him. Maybe that's why he was in office so long, although I don't try to justify that at all. I don't think anyone should be in a particular office for 44 years, but you might want to comment on
Yeah,
what
he
you
lived and
heard.
breathed that office. When you look at his schedule, and his son cooperated a lot on this project and loaned me a lot of material. One, where he was a real pack rat and saved everything. He had his desk calendars, the little paper ones that go on a little ring that you flip over on your desk, every year saved. I got the years like 1948 to 45 with his schedule. He had 2, 3 events every night. He never missed a Little League parade, you know, a chicken dinner, any kind of picnic, and it wasn't all for politics. He really loved common people, not just common people, the judges and the business people at the Fort Orange Club. He liked people, and he liked interacting with people, and that was one of the reasons that he did stay in the job, and that door was open to anyone. That's the interview I had with him as a graduate student. I'd been to Albany less than a year. I called him up. He answered his own phone, put me through, come down tomorrow. It was a Saturday. I went down and had like an hour-and-a-half interview with him. And that's the kind of guy he was. That did say a lot to me about this dual nature of him. I mean, I enjoyed that part of him. How many mayors were like that? You know, a very rare political person that was that kind of person. But then he had his other side, too, certainly.
Anyone else? Last call. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you all for joining us today, and we invite you to join us for the reception in the librarian's room, and more conversation certainly with Paul and other people. Thank you again. Have a good evening.